Welcome back. So I started the show by talking about Ken Dryden. For those who may have not heard over the weekend, sadly, tragically, he has passed away. He was only 78. Passed away from cancer, which apparently not many people knew he had been battling with. Bob Gainey, who played with Ken Dryden, actually won 4 of those Stanley Cups that Ken Dryden won as well. Teammates back in the mid to late 1970s is on the line. Bob, thanks so much for taking the time. I know this has got to be a tough, tough day.
Oh, I'm happy to be with you, Aaron. Thank you.
Bob, let's talk a little bit about, and we've heard so many people pay tribute about Ken Dryden, but you as a teammate, people say he was humble. I heard one quote from someone suggesting it didn't matter how out of a hockey game you were. When you had Ken Dryden as your starting goalie, you knew you always had a chance to win.
Well, he was a great competitor, and I think his personality does include a large amount of humility and privacy. On the other hand, like in some other ways in his life, he's been very public as an author and in different ways where he really put himself out there as a government official. As a player, he was super competitive, which isn't surprising when you add up the kind of rewards that he took out of his time in the National Hockey League over a very short period. And he was a great teammate. I don't really remember any blaming of a goal going in by Ken Dryden towards the defenders or the defensemen. He played his position. He played it as well as he could, and really a great teammate and an elite player.
You know, I told a story off the top. I was working as a sports reporter back then, early in the by the 1970s when Ken was there. And I remember you learned fairly quickly if you wanted an answer to a question and you were doing an interview, he was the guy to go to because he would actually think about answers and give you an answer. And sometimes they'd be a little long, but you always would get something insightful and thoughtful from him. Was he like that in the dressing room?
Well, I think he's like that in his life. And I think one of the things that really is a hallmark of Ken is his curiosity. He's curious about everything and about people. He could connect with people at all different levels and places and backgrounds. And one of the things that stands out to me about Ken is like he would absorb the things that were going on around him or us, and while we would just walk through them and live them, he was thinking about what do they mean. And I think a lot of that came out in the book he wrote right after he finished playing, called The Game, where all these intangibles or pieces that didn't seem to fit together, he was able to draw them and knit them all together into a really compelling story, and not for only the hockey fans from the outside, but for us who were inside that group of players at the time. It was enlightening for all of us.
You know, if you look back, and by the way, for people who haven't read it, it's kind of like I want to read it again. The Game, the book that Ken Dryden wrote, which has been called perhaps one of the greatest sport books of the 20th century. I think it's up there in hockey with Ball 4 and baseball, the Jim Bouton book. But I wonder, people who, as I said, don't realize or don't remember, he played 8 years, won 6 Stanley Cups, and then basically decided, you know what, okay, did what I had to do in hockey, and I'm leaving. And I'm wondering as a teammate, when someone does that, what the reaction was, what you guys were thinking.
Well, I think from inside we knew that it was coming. It wasn't as though it was regular conversation, but he had other places that he wanted to go, and it might get dropped in over dinner on the road where, you could say, this may be the last year that I'm going to play. And that particular, that Ken left, there were strong players that led that team who also departed, like Jacques Lemaire left that year at the same time. And really, we weren't the same club without those strong players in those positions.
I said, again, off the top, talking about the greatest Canadian goaltenders, and I guess arguably you might throw Patrick Roy's name into the mix, or maybe Jacques Plante's name into the mix. What did you think? You look back, you've been with this team, you've been with the organization for many, many years. You consider him to be the best ever?
Well, I would say they have to be slotted into the era that they play. And in Ken's time in the 1970s, you could look at goals like Bernie Perron, perhaps with the Flyers, or another goalie from that era. And I think Ken is probably the top goalie of his time. Patrick played at a different time, and Carey Price at another time where the landscape is different, the competition is different. So being able to put them all into one basket, Jacques Plante played at a very different time, and so did George Vezina, who the trophy is named after.
Yeah, look, it's tough. I know we're going to be talking to Steve Shutt, I think, later in the show today as well. But, Bob, for someone who played with this guy, who shared a dressing room, road trips and everything else, the big takeaway from Ken Dryden, they call him a student of the game. I think that's fair to say, right?
Well, I'd say yes. And I think he's just a student of life. He's curious. And that's why when he lands on a topic that sort of confuses him, he'll dig down and do the research on it. He wrote a book, say in the last 7 or 8 years, about concussions and how they have affected players, and how it should be handled differently. But it's a topic that, for some reason, we all talk about concussions, but he went ahead and went further and got the information and laid it out in front of us so that we all, in a very clear and easy way, could follow it from A right through until the end to Z, and be better informed and understand better. And that was this is what he did in many ways. He didn't just walk through things. He was pulling them in and absorbing them and coming up with his synopsis of how they fit together and what it meant.
So I guess, we've got to wrap up here, and I do appreciate the time. You look back on someone's life, someone's career. First of all, can I just ask, because this is something I've heard from a few people that I've talked to, the idea that we learned of his passing, and apparently very few people knew he was sick. Is that what you believe as well?
Well, I think, Aaron, that's one reason it was I wouldn't put it in a shock situation, but unexpected, because Ken illness private, and I still really don't.
Well, I think we lost the line. Bob, you still there? Okay. I know he's in his car, so I guess for whatever reason he's gone. But yeah, I guess, again, what he started to say was not knowing that Ken Dryden was as sick as he was. Bob, are you back? Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back now. So you were just saying, I said, was it a shock? And you were saying, what about the illness?
Well, I wasn't aware of it, and I don't think many people were. And I think this is, Ken's private area.
Right.
So he was very public in some ways and very private in others. And the other thing is, for his group, whenever we would be together, that group from the 70s, he was probably looked the fittest. He looked like he was going to go for into his 90s. He was strong. He was energetic. His mind was still super, super sharp, and so that added those things together, and that's what made it not a shock, but definitely a surprise for me when I heard the news Friday.
Surprise and shock and sadness, I think, especially for Habs fans in the city, and basically for fans of hockey who might have known or got to know who Ken Dryden was. Bob, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Aaron.
You bet. Take good care. Bob Gainey, who played with Ken Dryden, mid-70s. So the number was Ken Dryden won 6 Stanley Cups. Bob Gainey won 5, 4 of those with Ken Dryden as the Canadiens goaltender. So he knows of what he speaks. By the way, that book, so we mentioned The Game, which most people are familiar with. I hear people talking about that. As I said, that's the one considered a special work, one of the best sports books of the era. The other book that Bob was referring to there was a book called Game Change, The Life and Death of Steve Montador and the Future of Hockey, which examines concussions and basically at that point kind of woke the NHL up to the fact that this was a serious problem and only going to get worse. And of course, they've taken steps to deal with that going forward. So that's thanks in part, in no small part, I think, to Ken Dryden as an author. All right. We're going to take a break. We're going to go to news. And then when we come back off that, you may have heard the Montreal Firefighters Association not very happy with the situation where a fire in Montreal West, even though a fire station was literally blocks away, They couldn't get to the fire because their equipment and their truck is a one big mess. We're going to hear from Chris Ross from the Montreal Firefighters Association when we come back.